Welcome to the fifth video in the Odor Always Moves series, where we are translating the complexity of odor movement down to the operational level for canine handlers and trainers. This is part two of the odor movement inside the building due to wind, and we're going to be continuing on with the topic of the influence of eddies and flows, opening locations, and flow diversions. As always, these are dedicated to my first bomb dog, Daisy. These are for educational purposes only, so they're just to help you understand the concept of airflows. And so kind of take the information and apply it to your situation as best you can. These are not meant to simulate any real locations. So for this particular video, just like the one, we're using the exact same warehouse. So we have a big area. We have some vehicles inside. We have a couple office spaces, a couple interior storage. We have garage doors and access doors on the perimeter. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. The odor locations are the same as before. I got 3 locations. They're all putting out the exact same quantity and type of odor, so same properties, same behaviors. And it's just to help us visualize what's going on in the building. And if you remember, the first 3 scenarios, we did the upwind side door, just a regular standard door, and then the downwind side, and that's where we first saw the flow diversion effect. And then the third one, we had a big open garage door on a non-symmetrical side of the building. For this one, though, we are going to be doing 2 scenarios on the symmetrical side, so basically the smooth side on this back side. And we're going to be looking at a standard door opening with into the wind and against it. And then for the 6th and final scenario, we're going to actually look at all the garage doors having gaps, and just to see what it's like to have multiple openings in the building. And as before, the wind velocity is 10 miles per hour, about 4.4 meters per second in a fixed direction. Now, things to remember: advection covered in video 1. Basically, if the air is moving, the odor's moving with it. And the Bernoulli's principle, that's in video 2, along with eddies. And that's just, how air pressure and turbulence will impact flows. And then the size and location of the openings relative to the wind flow have an impact on that interior air movement. So we're just going to continue seeing that. And the faster the wind, the greater the impact. And the more interior rooms and the size of the structure that you're doing your search in can minimize how much odor movement actually is on the interior. Scenario 4. Now this is with the side door, again, on this smooth side of the building, and it's going to be opening into the wind. And you can kind of see how that's angled there in that area. And we're just going to run the animation. And you see the odor spreading out, and it's pretty quick, because remember, this animation is 10 minutes and it's sped up. Okay, and it kind of stalls out a little bit, and the reason for that is basically the flow is trying to establish, and you'll see that in a little bit. But man, once that flow establishes and it stabilizes, then it has a dramatic impact on how much it's moving that odor around the building. And it's pushing it clear out. The main concentrations are going much further away from the door. And you can see predominantly the odor is moving away from the door, and we'll show you, but it's in this area that it's moving the most. So we're going to look at this just kind of zoomed in so we kind of see what's going on with the door here. Initially, as the wind starts picking up, remember the reds and the yellows are faster velocities, and blues and the purples are slower. And you can see the direction arrows. So initially, it's all going towards the door as this flow is going over it. And as we run the model, you can see this eddy starts to form on this backside. This is that variable velocities. And you can kind of see over here, and this, if you notice, this is when it kind of stalled out a little bit. There wasn't really much going on inside the door, and all of a sudden now it starts pushing in, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And you can see these arrows are kind of circular. So you got these coming along this wall, these coming being pulled in, these kind of being pulled in, but then reversing, and then this flow predominantly coming down to the bottom. And this velocity, the speed of this air coming in, continually increases. And as this flow increases, this uh, air gets pulled over towards that door. But it's really unstable, and that's what we're going to see here. Now, this is just that direction arrows. We're going to show this animation again, just a different way of looking at it. And to see the turbulence and kind of the inconsistent flows that we're dealing with here. And you can see this eddy forming as we expect on the backside of that door. But there's another eddy here, and it collapses very quickly. It establishes, then it collapses. It establishes, then it collapses. But predominantly the flow's coming out down, away from the door, whereas these flows are going towards it. But this is the one that's kind of interesting because sometimes the flow is going away and sometimes it's going into the door. So it's a complex airflow when that door is opened up into the wind because of the effect of the eddy. And this is just a good visual of that. So you can see the streamers here. This is just particle pathways of the air. And you can see this is our well-defined eddy. We've seen this before. So basically the flow is coming up, circling around, hitting the door. But some of it is now being diverted. So that's a flow diversion effect by that door on the eddy. And then it's coming in here. And it's kind of confusing for the air because some of it was being pulled into this way. Now you got some diversion coming in, and it kind of creates like a little tornado. And you can see that better here, where this, you can see that it is literally like a little mini tornado, very slow velocity relative to the outside air. And it's spreading, this flows all the way out, pulling in from this direction, pulling in from this direction. Now, when we animate it, you can see this flow path, again, just going over that door. You see the eddy form. That all makes sense. And initially, the air is being pulled out. Okay, but as this stabilizes, that flow is going to reverse because that door then starts acting as a diversion flow to that eddy. And so then it starts pushing in. And that's where you saw initially the odor pull towards the door and then towards the end when it stabilized and it had that established path into the room, it basically was now creating a pathway in. And it creates, because of that turbulence, because of those two really kind of eddy effects and then the flow diversion of the door, it creates a jumbled mess of airflow within the building. And that's why it spread out as much as it did. Okay. And that's kind of the big thing to keep in mind. The longer that door is open, the more chance that flow has a chance to stabilize. But the other thing to keep in mind is if you're going in that door, if you have a team going in and maybe a bunch of people going in and out of that door, that's going to destabilize it again. And so you'll get a more of a pulse effect and less of a dramatic impact in terms of the spread of the odor within the building. And so it may be something to kind of keep in mind. If you can do your entry and then close the door, that may be better for the dog where the odor's not being spread out as much as versus leaving the door open. And this is just a quick snapshot. This is the halfway point. So this is after that flow got stabilized. And you can see that it's really starting to spread. And if you remember the animation, it actually went clear over and filled out the entire room. And remember, the red is 100 times more concentrated than the blues. So it had a big impact, more so than you may think. But a lot of that is dependent on the stabilization of that flow. So the lessons from this one, yeah, openings on the side of the building, they can have an impact, as we can see, in terms of that odor movement in the building. And when it opens, so it swings into the wind, the eddies on the backside create strong turbulence at that doorway. And that's what causes the most air movement in the building. And it's not consistent air movement. It's kind of jumbled. It's a mess. And when you are going in and out of that door, it's going to cause that flow to disrupt and try to reestablish and stuff. So again, in that situation, it might be best that once you make entry, you get the door closed, stabilize the airflow in the building. If that's not an option, just be aware that that can be moving the odor significantly within the building. Scenario 5. So this one is just like we said before, but now the door is going to be open into the opposite direction. And we're going to see how this works. And initially it pulls right up to the door, and actually you can see it start trying to go outside the door, but it doesn't. But you can see the flow going off to the right, down to the corner of that building, that interior corner, and then you start seeing it get pulled more and more, and it slows a little bit, but then it's going to start picking up, and there's obviously some flows because you can see that storage room down below, that's being impacted by the flow. And you can see that odor continually being pulled along that outside wall. So the biggest thing is the odor is being pulled from this source up to the door, but then being pulled down this way and then being moved up in this direction. Okay. And then this flow down here was actually being pulled out into this area. This door just never really came out of that room. The flow wasn't as dramatic over in this side in that 10-minute time frame. So it really wasn't influenced. Let's take a look at the arrows and the velocities. And you can see that flow diversion of the door being open is it's got a significant flow going inside here and going along. And this is some decent velocities, particularly right at the door. And this is critical to understand that if you have an odor source that's along this upper wall, upwind wall, it will be pulled, and even down here, it will be pulled to that entry point, and your dog will likely detect it upon entry. But if that odor source is downwind, you have to make sure that you work that dog downwind to make sure it gets into a position where it can detect it, because the odor is basically being pulled away from the door. Okay, and that's important when we're doing entries and depending on what we're looking for. So this is just the flow. We got the flow coming up. It hits that door. Part of it diverts down and around. You got the eddy on the backside that really has no impact on our overall flow. And so the primary flow is still going up and around, but you have enough of that flow going in, and we saw the velocity of it. And that pulls the odor from this area into, well, the air, so if there's odor there, but pulls the air from this area into that doorway, okay? But everything else is being pulled down and around. And this is just another view of that. Now, you can see here the streamers are much more defined than that last scenario. If you remember, that last scenario looked like a bird's nest inside of here. There were streamers everywhere. This one's a lot more defined and stable, and that's because the flow comes in, it hits this corner, goes up along that wall, up along the ceiling, hits the back wall, drops down, and then is brought back into the door again. It's kind of repeating that cycle. And that's why there was no influence on the odor in this area, but why there was an influence on the odor in this storage room, okay, is because you had that pretty well established flow path right by the door into this one storage room, but nothing really over in this area. And this is just another view of that. You can see the higher velocities and the streamers hitting that corner and then going up and then start going across the ceiling, and these lower ones being pulled in to that flow path by the door. So again, openings on the side of the building have that impact, and the effect of the door swinging out to the downwind side results in the odor on the interior being pulled to it if it's on the upwind side of it, but away from the door on the downwind side. And this flow is way more stabilized than the flow where the door is open to the upwind side. And just it has more consistent velocities and the flow path is better established. Okay. Now, again, every time a person goes in or a team goes in, it's going to disrupt it, but it's not going to be as dramatically impacted as the prior scenario. Scenario 6. And this is where we have all these garage doors, and you know, we're going to have gaps in them, okay? And you can see that, you know, that they now have gaps. You can see I have multiple garage doors on the symmetrical side. I have a garage door on the upwind side, and I have that one garage door that we did for scenario 3, but it's closed now, but it just has some gaps. So imagine all the garage doors, the seals are bad. That's what this is trying to simulate. And then you have a bunch of garage doors on this downwind side. As we see the flow start to go, it's much more animated, much quicker. And this flow up here got pulled right up to these areas, and that's the influence of the Bernoulli principle going along the side. Remember, it's creating that low pressure and wants to pull the air from the inside. Okay, but then it starts getting broken up because there's something else going on, and we'll see that in a little bit. But now you start seeing this flow start getting pulled down towards this lower area with some going out these doors up here. And then this one is being pulled pretty consistently out this room. That's a significant one. Okay, and then this door is also the odor in this room. It's a closed door, but there's a gap at the bottom. That's being pulled out. Okay, so you had a lot of significant movement, but I hope you noticed the concentration levels were way lower than the prior scenarios. You can remember particularly the first scenario, it was spread out all over the place. And though it was moving a lot, it was very low velocity, so the concentration could be maintained. Here, the concentration is not being maintained. There was pockets of it, and then they break up. And we saw that in an earlier video where we did the search and rescue scenario in the collapsed building, where you start having shear dispersion where differing velocities break up the odor and keep it from being concentrated. Now let's look at it from a velocity standpoint in the arrows. Arrows a little bit hard, but we'll see the colors and that'll give us what we need to see. And you can see this flow picks up here, and this flow, you got some defined velocity, and it's starting to pick up speed down here. And this just keeps going further and further down. And these sides all make sense. This is what we're used to, you know, along the sides. These velocities pick up. This is the higher velocity, so the flow is being pulled out here along these doors. Okay, but this is the one, this blue here is what I want you to pay attention to. This is a pretty well established flow path of higher velocity relative to the rest of the building. Okay, and what we're going to see if I change this to a different color. Okay, and so basically I'm just tightening up the scale so that you can see anything that's red or you know yellow. It's basically 1 meter per second, so about two miles per hour, or yeah, 2 miles per hour, I think. And this is you can see there's pretty significant flow path. So do you guys remember that when we did that upwind door, there was no air movement in the building because there was no openings. But now if we have openings, there's a significant flow in here. And it's going right through, and it's taking that path of least resistance down to these downwind doors. And that's where we were seeing. So this odor up in this area was being pulled up to these doors initially, but then it started getting pulled down into this flow. Because again, the Bernoulli's principle, this is the lower pressure, and it wants to be pulled down into this flow. Okay, so if you have multiple openings on a building, it can have a significant impact on the interior air movement and the odor. And this is just a streamer, just to kind of show this one. We were familiar with it with that eddy effect inside that kind of carport area. But this is a streamer. It's coming in these doors here. And it's pretty well established. It's not as jumbled. It's jumbled in here because the flow is coming around. It's doing the circular motion, so it's much more jumbled in the center, which is why that odor couldn't maintain consistency. And you had these higher velocities down here, and then you had this jumbled mess kind of in the center. But even this was jumbled, it wasn't like the rat's nest. This was still defined in terms of fixed pathways. Okay. So if your search area has multiple openings and there's any wind, then there's going to be odor movement within the structure. And the speed of the wind, the number and size of the openings, and their locations is going to dictate how much that odor is going to spread inside. And then the higher wind speeds will find a path through the building. And that's the key, is it's always going to take that path of least resistance. And if there's an opening on the upwind side and the downwind side, it's going to go through there. Okay, and that is what's going to be the driving force for odor movement within the building. Okay, so summary of this entire two-part series, the direction of the door openings relative to the wind can have an impact, and how much air is going to move within the building, and turbulence and flow diversions at that opening, what is driving that. Multiple openings, even small ones. This can be just partially open windows or broken windows or holes. They can have a significant impact on that interior air movement. And then the eddies caused by that interior airflow and the redirection of wind into the building, those are kind of the dominant influences on that interior air movement. So I hope this was helpful, and you can go out there and next time you do a building search and you open up a door on a windy day, and you'll think and pause for a second going, hey, what's the wind doing, and how may it be moving the odor inside this building, and how can I modify my search if necessary to have a better success rate. Upcoming lessons, video 6, I believe, is going to be building ventilation systems. I think I've got the models figured out to accurately reflect that. I've already done some of it, but there was another one I wanted to work on and needed to fine tune it. And then upcoming topics, as time permits, the search and rescue mountainous terrain, the effects of wind speed and terrain, and then urban terrain and Venturi effect, and buried hides, thermal convection of air within a room, and that's going to be important because, like, if you're in a room and you got windows that are being hit with the sun, or maybe you got a heat source in it, that can have an impact on the air movement. And then still working on trying to accurately represent vegetation's influence on airflows, and even trying to apply that to like tracking. That's kind of the holy grail of this modeling, is if I can simulate tracking. So that's what's on the plate as time permits. Appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I always will do my best to respond. And I hope these have been helpful for you. Have a great day.